What is architecture?
Well, architecture, in the kind of physical sense, is basically what surrounds us. I mean, speaking from of somebody who lives in, say, Western Europe or in a Western country, basically we are surrounded by architecture. Architecture, of course, is also a field of interest, a field of activity, a kind of profession. And I guess if you want to combine the two, I mean, the field or the profession or the kind of discourse, if you like, of architecture is how to design, how to make, how to realize this environment that surrounds us.
And what can architecture do?
Well, architecture forms the horizon of our existence, if you like. It's the physical reality that we are confronted with. I mean, other than human beings, be it in buildings, be it in cities, be it also in countryside, which is largely designed or made, man-made by architects in the widest sense. Be it in infrastructure, basically our life from cradle to grave is happening within architecture. So those people who can influence this environment obviously have an enormous power over people's horizon, people's literal kind of freedom to move, people's perspective on life, people's kind of spatial being, if you like. So architecture is very powerful.
Do you feel there's responsibility when designing a building?
Of course. I mean, you when you design a building or you build a building, you're always taking something away. I mean, it's always an act of destruction because you're somehow replacing something that has been there, which hopefully is of a lesser value of what you're going to replace it with. But nevertheless, you're taking something away, and you hope that whatever you're contributing is a huge improvement, not just for the people who you are designing for, like your direct client or your whatever immediate user, but also for the city or the community that lives around it. And certainly we are very much responsible, we're very much aware of this responsibility.
Can you make us an example of maybe a recent building and the aim you were trying to achieve with it?
Well, I could take almost any building, but maybe let's say we're doing at the moment we're building a museum in Mestre in Venice, which is in the center of this kind of small town, and it's happening on a site which used to be occupied mostly by a small convent and some outbuildings. These buildings were used for when they're sort of originally of the 16th century, so they're relatively old. But I mean, they've been used for the longest time by military forces, so they were used as barracks and various kind of accommodation sheds and so on and so forth. And they were in a compound which was totally enclosed. Yet this is in the middle of the city. I mean, like the dome is about, I don't know, about 150 meters away or something like that. So we're introducing this was a competition, and we were lucky enough to win it. And one of the key issues of our proposal is that we are basically opening up the site. We're kind of making a diagonal route through the site, which makes a connection from A to B. And it accommodates the building program that's needed in such a way that this is possible. Yeah, I mean, some of the buildings had to be taken away. We are converting the convent, turning it into a kind of little sort of urban situation is sort of like shopping, gastronomy, workshops, sort of various activities, and right next to that is the museum. And yeah, I mean, you're wondering, you're totally changing the center of the city. You hope for the better. You hope you're kind of creating some kind of attractor, some place where people will meet, where somehow this kind of vague term of urbanity somehow finds a home that can happen. Actually, less. Or maybe because of the architecture, or also because of the architecture, but also in the end because people are meeting there and people are using it, people are somehow encouraged to interact, to create new things that sort of come out of this encounter. And yeah, it's a big risk, it's a big investment, it's also we have certain theories, we have to speculate, we have certain aims, and we're hoping that they will somehow be fulfilled or maybe even exceeded, who knows.
Yeah. What is your architectural position?
I mean, that's a kind of difficult question to answer, because I mean, I mean, certainly what we do is so much kind of focused on the individual project. So it's partially to do with the context, i.e. the built context, the architectural context, if you like, but it's also partially to do with the societal context. I mean, where is this happening? Who is it for? It's also slightly to do with our clients. I mean, who are they? What are they trying to achieve? What can they afford? And all of kind of these things. So, in a way, the projects are generated very much out of a set of parameters which somehow start to shape and build a result. And this result emerges in an iterative process, which is very much based on dialogue internally, but also dialogue with all kind of parties on the outside. Having said all that, that sounds like it's like a little bit sort of non-committal. But having said that, we're obviously fascinated by, or we're building on the traditions of modernity. Let's say we were educated. I was educated in Berlin at first, but Louise and I met at the EA in London in the 1970s, at a time when there was it's like one of the high moments at that school, where a lot of speculation and somehow visionary speculation, let's put it like that, was going on. I mean, it was the time when Rem Koolhaas and Ilya Zengelis had just stopped. Zaha Hadid was just starting a unit. Peter Cook was there. There was Peter Wilson and various kind of people. So I mean, in a way, that's obviously something that's affecting people. And Louisa was then working for Peter and Alison Smithson for 6 or 7 years, who obviously, as the second generation of modern masters or modern movement, have kind of influenced this great deal. I was at the same time working for OMA, the then very kind of nascent and small OMA, mostly with Ilya Zengelis, and who, again, Ilya was taught still by the first generation modernists, by Arthur Cohn and various others. So I mean, there's a certain modernist tradition, if you like, which we're trying to put forward and to further develop. And if you ask what our generation has contributed to this discourse, I would say it's kind of maybe two aspects. One is to do with obviously the environment. I mean, we have more than any other generation been confronted with these kind of news of climate change and its consequences and so on and so forth. So I mean, there's an enormous awareness of energy consumption and the use, or intelligent use of energy, which has been preoccupying us in many projects. At the same time, there's this sort of idea of a kind of green politics and green politics, if you wanted to break it down to the most basic kind of facts is that it's about well-being. I mean, well-being not just for this generation, but the next generations to come, and you know, to maintain the world or the built environment as a place where one wants to be and where one wants to live and where one can live one's life. So to act as a keeper, if you like, a stalwart, a kind of custodian of this environment, and to make sure that it has the richness and the kind of inspiration of environments that we find today or that we can still find in nature and so on and so forth is one of the concerns. And we're very much aware that, of course, this question of well-being, or this question of finding oneself well in an environment, is to do with an intuitive approach. I mean, it's to do with your sensual perception. So you're seeing, you're feeling, you're touching, you're smelling, and so on and so forth. And hence, you know, architecture is quite often very rational. We're kind of thinking through our concepts very thoroughly, we hope, but at the same time we're trying to maintain its kind of sensual appeal. So it's a sort of combination of these two concerns and interests. Yeah, that's maybe enough for the time being. I could go on for...
Maybe you can tell us something about your design method.
Yeah, as I was saying, the design method is very much based on dialogue. I mean, that's both within the office, but also out of the office. We're trying to start at first principles every time we're approaching a project, and we're trying to look at you know, the predisposition of a project in a very fundamental way. Its position in the climate, its position in the city, its position to other buildings, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, we are looking at different materials, both in terms of their whatever carbon production, but also in terms of their surfaces, in terms of their cost, of course, in terms of the context of available technologies, and so on and so forth, and sort of slowly kind of make decisions more and more to kind of build a project. And to begin with, this is obviously because we're mostly gaining our work through competition. This is mostly an internal process amongst the designers in the office, and then as we kind of approach realization, consultants are more and more involved. I mean, they're involved in the competition phase normally already, but I mean, then kind of clients are involved, city authorities are involved, and so on and so forth. And we try and keep this this dialogue open, and keep it open as long as possible, actually, and try and build the project on the basis of these insights that are gained through conversation, really. In between, every now and then you sort of have to also produce results in inverted commas. So it's very healthy to have, for us it's models mostly. I mean, to have models that are kind of somehow establishing a reality, a step, and then it's a basis to work with and work from again. So I mean, obviously, naturally, you have these presentation processes, you have a competition deadline, you have a kind of presentation, you have a kind of building permit, and so on. These sort of stages which help you to sort of come to interim conclusions and then build on from that.